Hello, I am Radagast, and this is Mystic View. And we're here with Dan Winter, and we're going to be discussing bioactive technology. And as always, I'm here with my co-host, Shelley. Hello, Shelley.
Hello. Hi, everyone.
And hello, Dan.
Hi there. Nice to be here.
All right, Shelley. So I'm going to turn it over to Shelley. This is something that's particularly dear to her heart. Not that it's at all not dear to my heart, but I usually do most of the talking. We're going to do it a little different this day.
Oh, thank you. Well, we could just jump right in and start off with a quote by Manly P. Hall, because he always nails it really quickly. What he said was, we are the gods of the atoms that make up ourselves, but we are also the atoms of the gods that make up the universe. In other words, he was saying that man's spirit comes from the stars, his soul from the planets, and his body from the elements. And what we're really talking about here with our technologies is our advancing ability to really grasp what that means. Recently, I've had the wonderful opportunity to experience the TheraphI, which has so gone above and beyond any of the other technologies that I've been exposed to and using in my own practice as a quantum natural medicine doctor. And the TheraphI has been just such a joyful, blissful experience, and how that affects the healing in our body. So I'd like to come back to the magnetic potentiality in that, because of what that means for our ability to advance in telepathic areas as well. But let's just jump into kind of some of the biology and how that actually is effective, as opposed to some of the other biofeedback mechanisms that kind of sort of get you on track but don't really do the job.
Okay, I guess that's for Dan.
Well, on several of the websites, TheraphI.net, we reviewed a little bit about some of the history of high voltage healing, that even when Tesla originally had high voltage sparks flying around his laboratory when he was trying to prove to Edison that AC was better than DC, that all kinds of people, Marconi and others, came by and noticed they were having healings happen. Wounds were healing up, and it was so cool that people wanted to come and just stand in the high voltage blue sparks. And eventually this work with high voltage arcs influenced people like Lakhovsky and Rife. And eventually they determined what harmonic series, a set of voltage frequency ratios, were most potent for the high voltage radiating effectively capacitance, which is what the Lakhovsky device, and the Lakhovsky device was famously based on golden ratio harmonics, which we now know is basically phase conjugation, which is to say negentropic charge collapse, implosive. And if you take that to the next step, which is to make it more broad spectral, go farther up the ladder, you get to the optics, which Rife did, and then Priory did. And Priory was putting it in a plasma. But for Priory, he had to spend millions of dollars and have electronics the size of a house. But he healed thousands and thousands of cancers, et cetera, very famously here in France, documented by the French government, Priory. But then later, when I discovered that the key frequencies he's using amazingly fit the equation on the cover of my book, phase conjugate negentropic collapse, simply integer exponents of golden ratio, pure phase conjugation times Planck length and time, then I realized the principle behind Priory was, pure implosive charge collapse. So we spent some years applying that and developed this 500,000 volt precisely phase linked to opposing plasma tubes. And Priory didn't even know that he needed opposing plasma tubes, so ours should be considerably more potent, and it is. And we're having amazing success now. We have TheraphI.net, TheraphI.tech in New York, TheraphI.com.au in Australia, TheraphI.fr in France. Now there's centers, and there's a center in Belgium, 2 going in Norway, and 2 in South Africa and Canary Islands and California. It's becoming a bit of a global phenomenon, which is wonderful. A lot of the results are amazing, and there's hundreds of reports, and they're great. Mostly they're anecdotal. We're gradually gathering more medical results, and we expect to document this in a much more rigorous clinical sense soon. We're new, but anyway, it's exciting.
That's very exciting, and I look very much forward to adding Canada to that list of places where the TheraphI will be available.
Actually, there's one in Calgary, one going in Vancouver, And I think there's some more, but Calgary's done and Vancouver's going in. Oh, I know Victoria's scheduled too, I think.
Well,
Okay.
I want to do a little due diligence for our listeners. And part of that, I don't know why I don't seem to be coming up on the screen, but you can hear my voice. That due diligence is for people who are really new to Dan Winter, negentropic, which of course comes from negentropy. In case you don't know what that is, you have entropy is where basically something has a certain amount of energy and then it just kind of peters off and dies down. Negentropy would be that you can hold on or even build on that initial charge. And so what is negentropic collapse?
It is, that's the first chapter of my book, where, Origin of Biological Negentropy, where I say it's pretty sad that we live in a universe that physics are convinced is going toward chaos, toward entropy. And I think, obviously, that there needs to be an alternative view, a more hopeful one. And, I think we have proven now that focused human attention causes electric fields to compress negentropically. That's Bill Tiller's work, Conscious Active Creation. And of course, now we know in phase conjugate optics that wave mechanics can produce negentropy, clearly self-organization. And what I have proven is that the way negentropy occurs as it exists in the origin of rainbows, the origin of gravity, the origin of life, and the origin of consciousness, is that all negentropy is caused by a phase conjugate way to charge collapse to precise 0 point defined by the Planck dimension, Planck length and time. In other words, if you draw the wormhole down to the 0 point, you're drawing a caduceus down, which is simply a vortex, down to precisely the dimension of Planck length and time, which is the musical key signature of the universe. And that provides a way in which that charge can then be infinitely distributed, which also happens to be the mechanism of the collective unconscious and memory after death and all the good stuff, spiritual language, and how God gets to be everywhere at once. It's literally a longitudinal EMF that does action at a distance because of phase conjugation. So phase conjugate implosive collapse is the issue.
May I?
Yeah,
Can I come in a little bit more? All right, because again, I'm working for our listeners. So if I want to use a visual for people, I mean, sometimes what I 0 point kind of taps, almost like breaks dimensions, so to speak, where what we'll call it the ether or the energy that is kind of existent. By reaching a 0 point, it seems as if like we're actually able to tap into it, like a limitless energy that is available in the universe at that point.
That's good introductory language. A bit more precise, perhaps, would be to say that the visual is clearly, literally, two pine cones kissing noses, and they kiss noses precisely at the width of Planck length and time. And at that point, because the wave that was transverse suddenly goes down the spiral down the cone, and the transverse wave component phase conjugates spiral down the cone and becomes a longitudinal compressional wave. And that's what's superluminal and everywhere at once in the mind of God. And so that distribution into perfected charge distribution, namely fractal in the Planck dimension, is how you have this ability to control heat at a distance with your mind, and how the collective unconscious, the communion of saints, and what you need to do at the moment of death.
Yes. Well, I am trying to break it down to elementary language. I mean, I want you to use your language, which of course is rigorous and can communicate to the people who are physicists. And I feel I'm following it, but I'm trying to just put it into almost translate as if you were speaking French or something. And I'm going to, give a little English side language here. Because we've had a couple of your shows. I've had some people go, I wish I knew what he was talking about. It's so fascinating. I catch a lot. So I'm just trying to catch some of the things that I think they get stuck on and give them something. So in the middle of all this language, they're still transporting and carrying it forward.
The visual would be the two hemispheres of your brain are creating a frequency series, alpha beta, which is precisely Schumann harmonics. And the alpha beta brainwave that ideally makes bliss and peak perception is, again, golden ratio times multiples of Planck length and time. And so these alpha beta harmonics in your brain create this imploding collapse of two opposing cones, which converge at the corpus callosum in the spark gap, the pineal as it were, and distribute charge in the Planck dimension into a longitudinal EMF, sometimes called scalar or torsional, which is clearly superluminal and potential to be everywhere at once, and definitely the mechanism of action at a distance. So if you observed Ingo Swann heating a thermistor with his mind at a distance through a Faraday cage, only longitudinal EMF does it. So that's why Bonpo masters and Cherokee initiates are not Bonpo masters or Cherokee initiates until they can make a flame with their mind. We now know the wave mechanics.
Okay. And now with vortexes, it's if a vortex, or even like, let's imagine a tornado. So you almost have like a being or an organism within this organization, and so it's pulling from its surroundings. It's pulling into its vortex, and then if I recall, it actually collects so much that it actually has extra to give away.
Well, to the extent that the tornado has arranged itself geometrically in a conjugate array, the harmonic inclusiveness at center achieves that distribution, which is what made it centripetal in the first place, into what we call self-aware, which is why tornadoes are so susceptible to telepathy, just like ball lightning, because the nature of the vortex is phase conjugate.
All right. Shelley.
Yeah, self-aware and focused human intention really perhaps would be what we need to educate us to become that coherent, focused human intention, so that we can direct the, say, plasma when we're actually in the TheraphI device. So that iOS app I've been watching for a long time, and I saw recently it was released.
That's right. We're on the App Store.
And so would you just describe how people are able to use that to create and learn to develop that coherence that is so important, especially to have success in the TheraphI?
The app is called iThrive, ITHRVE.com, iThrive, and more pictures and animations at hrv-app.com. And it's very expensive, about $24. Inputs include, you can measure your heart rate variability with either the camera light on your pulse, or finger clip, which also includes oximeter, or chest strap for overnight HRV analysis, or now very convenient ear clip. So you have 4 input modes. It's probably the world's most powerful heart rate variability. It also measures coherence, measures stress, measures heart coherence, breath coherence. And in addition, the HRV component, LF, is also the 0.1 hertz of the Mayer wave, which is the key harmonic of the sacrocranial. And the programmer Patrick is advanced sacrocranial practitioner. That's how it started, and it's in part a tool for sacrocranial pulse healing practitioners, because you can measure the harmonics of the sacrocranial coming into phase. And that's how we originally observed one of the main effects of the TheraphI was the spine liquid pump almost invariably goes to the amazing 0 point, where the spine liquid harmonics go to 0, which is sometimes called healing crisis, which actually is more like a turning point, because after the spine liquid pump stops, it invariably emerges with the harmonics more in phase, which is called healing, basically. And so observing the spine liquid pump harmonics become more phase coherent is one of the prime objectives of the sacrocranial practitioners, who normally have to do this by just feeling the fascia, but with those low frequency harmonics now more visible using iThrive.com or hrv-app.com. So one of the goals here, obviously, is to help sacrocranial practitioners, but more so now this is being developed. Actually, the Johnson & Johnson is apparently interested to teach stress management and breath coherence and emotional coherence to their employees. And so we think this app is going to really go global very quickly. We call it the Swiss Army knife of HRV, heart rate variability. And remember, heart rate variability is the most studied subject in all of medicine, because if your heart rate is variable, it means you have an immune system. So by measuring variability, which is harmonic inclusiveness, in heart rate variability, you are directly measuring whether you have an immune system. The other aspect of this is that we know the TheraphI is widely thought to be one of the most ultimate brainwave entrainment tools. And the brainwave version of this, which is simply an extension of what's already there, flameinmind.com, is coming in a few months.
And okay, so the heart rate variability has so many different kind of technologies that have been available over the years. A good friend of yours, Patrick Flanagan, was also involved with developing his neurophone, for example. And then we have stem cell research, and we have key laser, we have all these different devices. However, when we want to just cut to the chase and direct something specific within the TheraphI, what is this going to be? What kind of development does that require for? Can somebody just come off the street and go lay on the table between the TheraphI lasers and receive specific healing? Is it a generalized result?
TheraphI in general will accelerate metabolism, accelerate mentation rate, accelerate the speed of thought. We're very consistently able to eliminate short-term pain, and after multiple sessions, in many, if not most cases, we can even eliminate long-term and chronic pain. Many people feel forms of bliss experience. There's widely reported increased quality of decision-making, but increased metabolism, metabolic rate means increased need for hydration and grounding. And it's just like the king putting on the phase conjugate dielectric royal crown of gold. It increases the speed of his thoughts. And if his thoughts are angry, then he will go nuts faster. So, it is a test for pure intention. That's true. As far as more serious diseases, obviously we make no claims, and there is a serious legal disclaimer, but we have had much success with more serious diseases as well. And people are even talking about not needing their eyeglasses. But for things like tumors, et cetera, which Priory had amazing success with, we're finding there's synergy with using cannabis oil. And even these healing oils, when zapped by the plasma of the TheraphI, are exponentially more powerful. It's also very powerful for treating water. And also, we believe, powerful for treating seeds, which is, we think, one of the reasons Stonehenge existed, for a phase conjugate saving of agriculture by seed treatment. And when you treat rock powders with phase conjugate fields, you create growth, and you can even spread those rock powders and heal lakes and ponds because sedimentation rate. So all kinds of implications for centripetal fields. And by the way, it's not really a laser tube. Those are plasma tubes.
Right. Yeah. I'm glad you corrected that. That's important. So look, recently we've had pharmaceuticals, something like the Geniex, right, where they are also claiming, oh, this is going to increase your brainwave capacity. I think it was 312% or whatever. That sounds a little dangerous. That sounds a little hazardous to start taking pharmaceuticals when something like the TheraphI device is available.
Self-empowerment is always the issue. And even the ayahuasca people are realizing they have astral hygiene issues. Mm-hmm. The plasma field of TheraphI has some parallel to a highly dense sacred place like the underground crypt below St. Martin de Canigou, where your hair stands up. It's a very similar feeling. Implosive capacitance. And, if you enter a sacred space and your mind's not in the right place, you become dizzy. And that's also true of the TheraphI. So, you're spinning the tornado, but you need to provide the intent. But in general, I would say, plasma fields go back directly to what the ancient shaman to the Lord was, which was, later mistranslated altar in church. The altar in church was a bioactive field technology directly. That's what a shaman to the Lord is. Sitchin translated, Highward Firestone. So the self-empowerment, which defines sacred space, is definitely less invasive. Interestingly, Aboriginal and Indigenous peoples would never live in sacred space. They would use it only for healing and ritual.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so really, with the balancing of the brain hemispheres and what the hygiene that's being created in what was be considered the crystal palace, so pineal, thalamus, and pituitary, that would be very much creating an advance to a hygienic approach to meditation as well then.
During Kundalini and during TheraphI, you can often feel the area around the pineal begin to crackle, as I have many times. And, you know, as the liquid turns to crystal, the plot thickens and the braiding recurs and the charge embeds and the field effect gets bigger. And there's a limit to that because, you know, it stresses the mineral to water bonds in the body and you have hydration issues. So you don't do Kundalini more than until your inner voice tells you, you know, you need to balance this tornado before you live in the center of lightning bolt anymore. And the same is true of TheraphI.
Right. So your friend Patrick, he developed some hydrogenating water.
Patrick took the clathrate, one of the most healing geometries for natural water, called a clathrate cage, which is essentially dodecaecosa. And then into the center of that, he put monoatomic hydrogen, which I more recently proved was fractal because I wrote a new equation for hydrogen radii proving their phase conjugate collapse. And so monoatomic hydrogen, like monoatomics in general, is a phase conjugate implosive. And so that monoatomic hydrogen at the center is conjugate at the atomic level, and the water clathrate is conjugate at the molecular level. And the net result was a very implosive device. Remember, one of the reasons that Buckminster fullerene was the hottest subject in all of chemistry for many years was because the 0 point at the center produced so many interesting self-organizing nonlinear effects. So Patrick made use of that when he made one of the most powerful free radical scavengers that existed. Unfortunately, the multi-level marketing that they used to launch it, they eventually stole it from him. Then he had to do mega hydrogen. It got very complicated. But, you know, Patrick was saying he took a crystal the size of a TV set of microhydrogen and dumped it in the spa, and then everyone would get in and you'd have a real buzz. But the thing was, you know, there were some astral hygiene issues.
Sounds fun. Well, and then another of your friends.
Patrick is an amazing water scientist, by the way.
Yes, and I love the work that he did with the dolphins, and that was unbelievably in 1958, and now we're just hearing wind of it recently. Mm-hmm. And those dolphins, they operate under bliss. All the cetaceans seem to exude that bliss, and you can just come close to them and feel it. Which I love. That idea of being able to communicate, and I'm sure lots of our listeners will enjoy the idea of being able to communicate, not just with the cetaceans in this way, but coming back to the idea of the magnetic fields. If the magnetic field is altered, it would enable telepathy, would it not?
We think the mechanism of telepathy is the phase conjugate collapse that allows the propagation of longitudinal EMF or scalar or torsional. The Russians proved that with their military-grade telepathy from the Kozyrev mirror. You always had to place the microwave columnator at the ley line cross, measured in nanoteslas, or they wouldn't get their military-grade telepathy. So clearly, telepathy is more enabled in a phase conjugate environment, and that's proven. So yes, you know, and magnetics is part of that spectrum, but the wave principle is clearly conjugate implosive collapse. And even we think when, you know, Ingo Swann did that, so the famous experiments, etc., and the remote viewing people, the brainwave states that achieve that, you know, astral projection and remote viewing, again, we think the key frequency is the alpha beta that makes all that work. They're the same as the Schumann harmonics, they're exact golden ratio exponents of Planck. So.
Right. And so if we were to look then at the comparison of what another of your friend, Dr. Todd, has been working with and developing with light, with laser, and with stem cell, you know, this kind of a phenotype, I was wondering if it would bring us to a position where we could make altered choices before becoming, say, an addictive personality or a narcissistic personality. Those types of responses, once you say a drug addict, 40 years of use, would they be able to go in the TheraphI and achieve freedom from that type of an addiction?
You know, my teacher for brainwave biofeedback, Marty Woodkey, now I think he's in San Diego, but, you know, he emerged from his cocaine he proved that the day you show the alcoholic how to make his own alpha frequencies, on that day, he won't want his next drink of beer, actually. And the physics was clear. If you cannot make alpha, then when you close your eyes, you see dark. As soon as you learn how to make alpha in your brainwave, which is simply Schumann, then when you close your eyes, you see light. It's very simple. So alpha beta coherence turns the lights on inside your head. And if you can't turn the lights on, then you seek something that's addictive to replace that. And alcohol replaces that because the alcohol makes the brain nervous tissue more conductive and therefore more likely to have alpha beta. So by preventing oxygen in the brain, which increased connectivity, you replace the alpha that was missing. So when you get some simple biofeedback cues to make the right alpha beta, which is golden ratio to Planck, phase conjugate, which produces bliss and peak perception, then you don't need your addiction anymore. It's very simple. So that was the subject of my first book, Conscious Kids, goldenmean.info/conscious kids. Implosion, Secret Science of Ecstasy and Immortality was simply that once you have any form of bliss process, all forms of addiction simply go away. It's old news, actually. Well, the TheraphI, because the main frequencies in the plasma are directly the alpha beta frequencies of brainwave bliss, widely reported TheraphI to be a brainwave entrainment device, that is very helpful to getting your bliss harmonics both in your brainwaves and your spine liquid pump, which fit together to make Kundalini work, which is why TheraphI is very helpful for bliss training. But you know, it's the old story. When you can use biofeedback or the TheraphI, we had this lady in Australia, and before lunch, she couldn't make, golden ratio brainwaves at all. She went out at lunch with a shaman who took her back to her childhood trauma. We lived it, let it all go. After lunch, she made these beautiful, blissful brainwave harmonics. So it was pretty clear that you couldn't release yourself into all that spin because all memory becomes present. And so if you've got anything blockages to memory, then, bliss is also blocked. It's an old story.
Right. So in essence, we really can influence the genetic code.
Well, the DNA braid is a direct response. The DNA braid phase coherence is a direct response to the phase coherence of coherent motion. Coherent EKG and EEG is measurably what causes the DNA braid phase coherently, producing embedding and implosion in DNA. So ultimately, the DNA's ability to implode and make a soul and make bliss is directly related to coherent emotion. That's been measured and proven. And Glenn Ryan did the measurements at my suggestion. Phase coherent EKG causes DNA braid. Mm-hmm. That's at goldenmean.info/DNA manifesto.
So it's really fun looking into the chemical kind of compounds of how this affects our body biologically. For example, the chemical compound interlocking at precise angles, say of DMT.
We think the DMT molecular bond mimics the pent-hex bond adjacency of the DNA ladder rung, actually. And so part of the trigger of the pineal by the DMT, the bioactivity, is actually, getting the pineal to implode by doing the same braid geometry that DNA is doing. We put some animation, 3D animation of DMT, as I mentioned here, that links goldenmean.info/pineal. But you're right, it's a profoundly useful meditation to look at molecular bond angles and bioactive materials as a sacred geometry, a waveguide to implosion. And really, that's why hydrogen is at the center of every DNA ladder rung.
I want to just come in because I remember what you just said about, the hex pent. And I looked at a DMT molecule one, I just looked at, and what it is, when you look at the molecule, it's a pent and a hex with a joined side. I mean,
that's right.
The molecule looks exactly like a pentagram and a hexagram with a joined side.
Yeah, and that's what 7 spins, 5 spins is about in the Ophanum sigil. It's all about embedding the tetracube into the pent, and which is, the tetracube creates charge stability, charge isolation, charge stasis, and then when you embed that in the pent, that creates charge projection, and it's one embedded inside the other. The pent, the 5 spins inside, the 7 spins outside. That's called the Anu, the sigil of truth, and it's the wave geometry of the slipknot of the heart of the sun, of the human heart muscle, and the braid geometry of DNA, and the centerpiece of hydrogen. That's proven in physics, actually.
Okay, I've definitely been inspired while Shelley and you were speaking. one of the questions, well, I'm going to stay with this, with the angles for a second. So a pentagram, if I've heard you correctly, is kind of something that helps charge to be distributed.
What we proved by wave equations was that the golden ratio, which is what the pentagram makes in wave mechanics, creates maximum constructive wave interference in recursive heterodyning. Whereas if you take the tetracube, which is hex cubic, the edge length ratio is all square root of 2. If you take square root of 2 series of harmonics, which is called the octave, and you interfere the recursive heterodynes, you create maximum destructive wave interference, which means that once you stuck charge inertia into a tetracube, the charge inertia cannot propagate through its harmonics. It can't get away. So it's literally charge isolating. It literally, ice is hex. And when the witch puts a hex on you, what she's doing is freezing or fixing the spell. Whereas when the witch says, repent and be saved, she's saying, you know, embed and charge distribute, and charge distribution is your immortality. And she's right. So, and it's the balance between the hex and the pent, that nature starts with hex symmetry to charge isolate, and then she uses pent symmetries to charge distribute, which is why every living protein is pent.
So that brings me to, with the hex, like quartz crystals, which are hexagram, are good for storage. Why, I mean, the Girku was a quartz crystal or some kind of...
Exactly. Good point. Yes. It's because the SiO2 bond, of course, is tetrahedral, and you'd ratchet the tetracube up a helix, and the shadow is a hex, which is a side view of quartz crystal, right, which is the z-axis birefringence.
So that brings me to a question I wanted to ask you. I buy my potatoes, always organic, and, you know, really healthy potatoes put out eyes very quickly. It's like if you don't eat them, they get eyes. So I was wondering if I stored my potatoes in a 6-sided wooden, like a little canister to put them in, would it actually store the energy a little bit and make them not, would it slow them down a little bit?
If capacitive harmonic series based on hex would inhibit breakdown, that would be the theory, yes, actually. Whereas capacitive series based on pent would increase charge distribution and increase the rate of seed growth. And we have proved that with purify.com. So that is the point. The physics of witchcraft is the difference between charge isolation and charge distribution. Because that's true of molecular chemistry.
I was wondering whether it'd be worth my while to build a little 6-sided wooden thing to keep my potatoes in, so that way I don't have to keep on picking the eyes off them or get to them so quickly.
Well, we started a project that's called Fractal Fridge, goldenmean.info/fractal fridge, which was to use capacitance like that to increase food storage. And actually, if you look at, they discovered the tumulus, all of the pyramid structures in the ancient times, they were not used to put people in so much as they were used for treating seeds.
And then now to follow up on the crystals, when you were talking about in the pineal gland, turning the liquid into a crystal, and then you spoke about dehydration issues, which remind me, because I am a medical massage therapist and have a fair amount of anatomy, and how much of the body's fluids are little more than liquid crystals. In other words, basically you're using the hydration to keep the crystals dissolved. But like anybody who's ever had a lymphatic lymph light out, come out instead of blood, as soon as the water is out of the lymph, you have these little yellow crystals.
Well, the way the wave mechanic in Kundalini bliss is clear that the phonon coherence of the sacrocranial pump phase coheres the ventricle liquids, which go from liquid to crystal. And in that case, they're horn shaped, and you get horny. And Benthoff documented and measured the frequencies and the ringing in the ear heard by meditators, which are turning the brain liquids from liquid to crystal. And we showed that in Kundalini cases, we showed that was a phase conjugate cascade, the ringing in the ears heard by meditators. So when you feel your brain liquids crystallize during bliss, what you're feeling is literally the horns of Moses and Lucifer creating the eyes of perception.
Well, even from a purely elemental concept, where the Kundalini is kind of seen as fire. And then you're speaking about as the Kundalini gets up to the pineal, it depletes the water, which is what fire would do to water. And then you have that crunchiness in there.
Well, it implodes and it pushes out all impurities. And so later the water will need to be replaced. Actually, Kundalini stresses the mineral to water a bond charge density of the whole body, and remineralization and hydration is usually required after intense bliss. But what's happening is the spine liquid low frequencies are then phase coherent, the phase conjugate component of the HRV, and then the ADP microwave. So the microwave measurements of Kundalini, which I did with Dratch, which are the phase conjugate frequencies of adenosine triphosphate, it achieves microwave radiance, basically, and you become a microwave antenna. And so what you're feeling is actually you're becoming a microwave source, such that, for example, causing insect navigation. And even the microwave waveguide antenna design is how pyramid walls were carved for that reason.
So that crackling that you're describing, in the Bible they speak of the renting of the veil, the tearing of the veil, and I've heard that, and it's a profound sound, but I associated that with a balancing more of the hemispheres, and perhaps then the exit through kind of the right hand side of God, as it were.
Well, balance would be a term for it. You know, in laser physics, you're balancing the right and left laser so accurately they phase conjugate. So the pine cones kiss noses very accurately between the brain hemispheres, and that it makes the low frequencies coherent enough to become superluminal. And that superluminal phase coherence is how you lucid dream, take memory through death, and why TheraphI so commonly increases clairvoyance.
Mm-hmm. And I love that we often will use octave as a term to describe on many levels. A study of ancient Greek philosophy shows that music education was inseparable from the philosophy of science, and that intervals of astronomical space were represented symbolically by whole number intervals of musical harmony. Our technology has so often used music to try to create that, and so they were nudging closer and closer, but not quite answering all the questions. However, what I love about that is that the musical notes in the Western tradition are related also to elements on the periodic table. I mean, each row on the periodic table, right? I mean, it's just called a period. There's 7 periods in total, and so on and so on. And it also describes the distance, I'm sorry, go ahead, from the sun, cosmologically.
No one would disagree that chemistry and physics is only music. Everyone agrees. The real tragedy of our time actually is when Einstein failed to realize that you can ride the longitudinal component of a conjugate wave through the speed of light with your attention, which is how you take memory through death and begin to lucid dream, that kind of phase coherence. And that's what they called the Ba emerging from the Ka. The Ka was the amount of coherence in the aura, and the Ba was that part of the wave coherence that could propagate through the speed of light. And to track that with your attention indicates you're beginning to be able to lucid dream. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Einstein saying that the speed of light was a speed limit was basically a fool.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
I mean, Einstein did a lot of beautiful, genius physics, but he also created some incredible stupidities. And one of them was, I think the speed of light was a speed limit. And then another was setting the stage for this idea about dark matter. There's all kinds of childishness there.
Mm-hmm. So really, this is taking us into a place where we get to experience what oneness really is.
Thank you for summarizing so nicely. That's what this new article we just worked on last week with Teresa, fractalfield.com/alchemy of fusion. And basically, when John Dee, in fact, I'm reading the book, it's right here. When John Dee designed the hieroglyphic monad and became the leading mathematician on the planet and designed the hypercube, and that later is proven to be the design of Shakespearean theater. Well, the reason you designed Shakespearean theater was so that you can create a oneness experience. Well, how does the hypercube geometry of Shakespearean theater, which is the basic cube octa, create the possibility for oneness? Well, in Midsummer Night's Dream, the sequence of emotions are pairs of opposites in phase conjugate symmetry to create charge implosion, and so you can identify with all as one at the end of the play. And that's the same physics of oneness, of the origin of symbol, which is the tetracubic origin of Hebrew and Sanskrit and Hungarian, Rovach, etc. So basically, you're setting up the conditions for phase conjugate opposing wave functions to implode, cast a spell, and make the oneness possible. So in the physics of Tantra or group fusion experience, you line up those pairs of opposites in the correct symmetry, Midsummer Night's Dream, and we're writing a book on that right now. You create the possibility for the oneness experience, and everyone knows that Shakespeare's play is about alchemy, and that's the same as the physics of isotope transition and charge fusion is people fusion, which is simply plasma embedding, which is what alchemy is. And we have new equations for isotope transitions about that, and a whole bunch of stuff going on there.
Right, and I mean, even our native traditions experience that as they would travel around the medicine wheel, for example. That's what they were trying to accomplish.
Exactly. That's right. So when you cast a spell and you change the air pressure in a room enough to blow the doors off, what's happening is the plasma domains of the opposing Hebrew or Sanskrit letters being cast towards center are conjugating and imploding, and everyone feels this plasma wind with this ritual, and you're lighting this tornado the size of continents, and that's how you communicate with interstellar plasma beings. And all the advanced physicists now agree that the giant interstellar plasma domains are the physics of angels, and so obviously those angels have a language, and it's called plasma symmetry.
Yeah, angels, and I often will relate that to an angle, a specific angle of light, and how important that is.
Yeah, plasma universe. The plasma universe people, they're physicists are turning spiritual very quickly, and that's a good thing.
That's a very good thing. Brad, you look like you have something.
No, I'm actually just sitting here, being happy that that a lot of coherence is happening here in the conversation, and the only thing actually occurred to me during his language was when he used superluminal. And again, for me as the vocabulary person here, superluminal is faster than the speed of light.
Yeah, and so we were talking about applying that to the physics of alchemy. So, we think if you make gold, you're making value. Well, the reason you're making value when you make gold is because you're creating increased conjugate symmetry, which is what a monatomic gold atom is. And what enables that isotope transition, maybe to finish the story a little bit, is a path for non-destructive charge collapse to allow the electron, because the proton, no difference between mercury and gold, so it's only an electron that has to move. Well, how do you get that electron to charge collapse from mercury to gold? Well, there has to be a path between valence electrons, and that path, which both Nassim and I got that right, is called the jitterbug, which is a spiral path to allow non-destructive charge compression, which is non-destructive charge collapse. So we have a whole new series of equations to enable and catalyze isotope transitions, all based on frequency and temperature. And we can think we can achieve isotope transitions, literally transmutation of hundreds of commercially valuable transmutations in the atomic table. So the physics of alchemy begins with the same story as alchemy in Shakespeare's theater. Here is Kelly has got some of this red powder from when they originally ground up the Kaaba stone of the Muslims, which is a phase conjugate dielectric. It's a Lucifer's eye. It's a meteoritic glass that has gold vapor propagated through. The sponge geometry becomes conjugate dielectric. And so a little bit of that ground glass is the philosopher's stone, the projective powder. And it was a red powder for Kelly and Dee. And you put a little bit of that in the size of a grain of rice into the red hot mercury in a phase conjugate phonon geometry, is seen from the movie Chain Reaction, actually. And they made the purest gold ever measured by the British Royal Society. So much so that Queen Elizabeth had to send her most expensive spy, Shakespeare, under the name Francis Garland, over to spy on John Dee and Kelly. And that's where he learned to write the play Tempest, because then John Dee did this heptagonal working around the Seven Hills of Prague. It made the storm that took out the Spanish Armada. Because at least at that point, the angelic forces knew that somebody was, not drunk and able to call the angels. And, that's how the play Tempest was written. Prospero was John Dee.
Right. And so the 9 great celestial keys are the angelical invocations, as it relates back to the Horn of Venus that you were speaking of earlier.
Right to the horn, did you say?
Yeah, the Horn of Venus, or Or even, what would it be considered, like something like the phoenix? That's not the right name that they use for it, but that phoenix bird experience.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned Venus, because all the last works of Anton Parks are about Osiris Enki being restored into the orbit of Venus, which we know is exactly the orbital time of Venus and Earth are exactly golden ratio integers times Planck, for a good reason, because its plasma orb is inhabitable, it's phase conjugate. So the reverse retrograde path of Venus looks pent from the Earth. And so it's a phase conjugator, so it's plasma embeddable, so advanced plasma beings could inhabit Venus. And this is half the, in fact, the book is entitled Testimony of the Virgin, actually. You know, the pent horns of Venus is actually because the orbit of that planet is evidence of intent. The orbital dynamics alone is proof that the orbit is designed with intent. And the intent was to achieve embeddability, to make the plasma centripetal around it, which is how you incarnate in anything. And that's why Osiris Jesus is coming back. It's almost like Schwarzenegger saying, I'll be back, except in this case, it's Osiris.
Yes, and we have to have enough coherence to be able to receive that angle at the to understand it, to move with it, to be directed by it.
It's a repent and be saved. And the physics of that means that every emotion and feeling that you had or have that is not shareable needs to be sorted first, which could require spitting out a lot of mucus.
I think Vincent Bridges also described that with the hieroglyphic monad, no? Wasn't that to do with the sun and the moon and earth, and you know how the sun enters Aries and so on?
The hieroglyphic monad was the life work of John Dee. Vincent had memories of the past life of Kelly, John Dee's partner. Now, the hieroglyphic monad was an attempt to synthesize a oneness from the symbolism of alphabet systems and astrology. And we now know the physics a lot better than Dee, that the alphabet systems indeed are about plasma fusion, tetracubic origin of Hebrew and Sanskrit, for example. And the dodeca houses of the zodiac for astrology actually represent the true physics, which is that the major masses of the universe are arranged dodecahedrally. That is proven. So the universe becomes self-aware in the same way that people do, and self-organizing and negentropic. So that is the hieroglyphic monad. It's the possibility of oneness. Now, Kelly, Vincent died writing the play that tried to redeem the memory of Kelly. And Kelly died because he claimed he wouldn't reveal the secret of alchemy to King Rudolph. But there's a little bit deeper physics there, because actually Kelly could not replicate the production of the red powder, the philosopher's stone, the projected powder, to make more gold. And the reason he couldn't replicate the philosopher's stone projected powder, because he didn't understand the physics of how the crystal, in this case, the Kaaba stone, or the shungite, or the stones on the streets of Prague, became phase conjugate dielectrics. So the electrical engineering is actually what escaped their understanding at that time. And it's very simple, actually. When the Templars are making the red glass that seems so dark you can't see that it's not black unless you're turning your head for the Gothic cathedral window, they're vaporizing gold through the sponge of molten glass at a geometry, so the sponge geometry becomes macromolecular, fractal self-similar to the atomic geometry of the monatomic gold vaporized propagating through the glass, making that glass implosive capacitively, literally the philosopher's stone. And that is the perfect seed for alchemy, actually. And that is the direction and the ultimate outcome for all of these technologies that we're talking about, is to help bring us to that point. That's right. Pure fusion physics. Fusion for people is the same thing as cold fusion for atoms. It's the same geometry. Absolutely.
And so when you have on your website these beautiful graphics, what I have found is that I can just watch the graphic, go into a meditation, and experience it firsthand, as opposed to trying to process it intellectually.
That's right.
It's way faster. It's a little shortcut.
And that's what the Grail animation is. It's just the spiral down that perfect cone into a dodeca revolved. And that becomes the Holy Grail, and the Holy Grail is in the blood.
Yeah.
I do have a question. With regard to meteoritic glass, so sugarite is the red form of it. That was the cobblestone. Is that correct?
Shungite is a form of conjugate dielectric capacitance. However, the cobblestone was a glass. There's two basic types of meteorite, the iron, and then you have the glass. And the glass meteorites, the only metal that generally survives the heat of reentry is the PGM, platinum group metals, gold, palladium, platinum. And propagating the gold as a vapor through the glass enables the glass to form a sponge geometry in which the molecular geometry can be fractal or self-similar to the atomic. And that's what makes it implosive capacitively, the eye of Lucifer.
Well, I was going to ask about moldavite, which is a green meteoritic glass.
And that's supposedly why John Dee and Kelly originally moved to Prague, because of moldavite all over the streets of Prague, which is remnant of, that is an alternate form of the phase conjugate dielectric and can serve some of the same function as the philosopher's stone when ground up. That's the myth.
But was it red moldavite or green moldavite? Because
in the case of Prague, I think it was green.
Oh, okay. Because I have a piece of moldavite, and
interestingly, that Kelly always said the projective powder, which they used, was red. So, but the mythology is they use some of that moldavite. But theoretically, if you measure the dielectric constant, you would know.
And then the other thing with Dee creating the tempest, basically, that drove off the Spanish Armada. Obviously, he did have intelligence and knew that the Spanish were sending it that way. My understanding is he had to do several days of work to create.
No, actually, John Dee told Queen Elizabeth he was going to do that 1 year before he did it, and they had that much notice.
Oh, okay. I mean, like if people are hearing that, he did a magical work and created a storm that drove off the Spanish Armada. My understanding was that was quite a lot of effort.
The story was that the Enochian workers with him occupied the 7 hills around Prague, but that the Kabbalists occupied the 5 churches. So it was literally a heptagram inside a pentagram, which was the Anu sigil of truth, from which they had gained the leverage on that much plasma. And supposedly the meteorologic history documents that the direction from which that storm came was unique to all of the weather history of England out of the North Sea. Mm-hmm. But again, this is mythology. There's a lot more to the story.
It rang really true when I heard the telling. I mean, it just seemed like this was what we would call a really premier, world-class magical work.
I mean, because even King Rudolph knew that if King Philip in the Spanish Armada won, the whole of Europe would be in the Inquisition for hundreds of years. So it was very important at that time, because King Rudolph had grown up in King Philip's castle in Spain and realized the guy was nuts. His favorite thing was to fry Protestants for breakfast. The Catholic thing was that perverse at that time. So it was necessary. But on the other hand, documenting the history is not nearly as important, in my view, as documenting the physics. And it is true that if we don't learn to steer tornadoes today, we deserve to be toast.
Well, talking about tornadoes, it seems that and I think I'm quite sure I got this from you, and I had a really huge aha. From what I know of, when the Native Americans were occupying Tornado Alley, it wasn't Tornado Alley.
Exactly. Actually, the fact that the plasma storms are out of control is indicative that the elementals are angry, and yes, the elementals absolutely should be angry. Absolutely.
I agree. And that was a really, it was like an instantaneous, of course. And then I even thought about how, again, the Native Americans do not have any tradition of that part of what's now known as Tornado Alley as being a place of horrendous tornadoes every year.
Exactly. And that point needs to be made to Americans who are cutting the magnetic lines through villages. So basically what everyone needs to do, go to their garden and create one large corner of the garden which is absolutely wild.
Yes.
And then talk to the elementals in the wild corner of their garden and learn to start that conversation. That's the beginning. And teach their children to see them.
that having something wild in your garden or by your garden is so crucial. I mean, I couldn't agree more.
That's right. And then when the children can see the elementals, suddenly they feel for them. And that is the beginning of the possibility of Arthur and the land being one.
Well, I think this has been a wonderful conversation, and we have a little over an hour of a show here, and typically that's when this is our third show with you, and they all run about the same time, Dan.
It's fun. I appreciate sharing, and it's very important that we, make the message shareable, the self-empowering science of spirituality. So I'm happy to share with you guys. And if people want more, there's more at fractalfield.com, and the index is there.
Well, just thank you so much again for joining us.
Thank you. Blessings. Blessings, guys. See you.
Hello there, I'm Radagast, and I'm here in Floyd, Virginia, outside of Blue Ridge Yurts. This is a 30-foot diameter yurt with 10-foot walls, regular outdoor living, and a real door. A kitchen, couches, TVs, bookshelves, a very roomy bathroom, and the guest bedroom, the master bedroom. This is what you can do in a yurt. Nice way to start an intentional community. Hello, welcome back to Mystic View. We took a little bit of a break and said, you heard us say goodbye to Dan Winter. And we're going to do a little bit of a wrap up. And part of it has to do with, the whole idea was, bioactive technology, and the TheraphI, which is probably one of the most brilliant bioactive devices, is not the only one. And then we also might want to address some of the things out there that are kind of the rage, and maybe there's a little more promotion than not. Before I give it a shot, I'll just kind of say with the different Rife machines that are out there, and I'm not discounting that they don't even have all of the frequency ranges that were part of Rife's machine. But what I'm saying is how they apply it to the body is not Rife technology. The Rife technology took these frequencies and put it through a tube with a noble gas in it that created a certain kind of coherence that when shot into the body made it effective. Having a device that you hold on to two iron things in your hand, or metal things, they're probably stainless steel, or even if you attach them to your fingers and your toes, whatever. And this is going to make the frequencies run through your body. I'm not saying that they're not running through your body, but they're kind of just running through the way if anything would run through your body. And they're not necessarily bioactive and doing the job. And so some people might go, but I've had friends who have gotten better from it. Well, this is where we come into something called placebo. When they test drugs, they always have two test groups, and they're telling them both they're giving them a drug, but one group is getting a sugar pill. And the amazing thing is how in the two test groups, what really proves that a drug is in fact effective is that it's higher than the placebo effect. The group that's not getting any medicine at all has a percentage that get better or report improvements and actually experience improvements. This is, of course, that we really can self-heal. So when we're given something and told that this is what it will do or what it will address, and we believe it, will produce the neurochemicals and restructure our body to actually deliver the results. And so what I'm saying with things like the Rife technology and some of these other frequencies, and it's in the quantum field and all the rest of this thing, that when people do see results, the chances are is that they're placebo. And the only reason I bring this up, again, when people get better, it's always a good thing. But we're trying to bring integrity to our community, whether it's the alternative, what you call it, New Age, the mystic community, and because there are now things that really work, and we understand exactly why they work. I mean, we understand that frequency. I mean, if you understand that, let's say the syphilis bacteria, the spirochete, has a specific frequency that will shatter it like an opera singer shattering a glass by hitting the right note. the thing is, that frequency has to reach it in a way that will actually affect it rather than just passing through the body. And Rife found out that you need to pass frequencies through into a tube that has a noble gas like argon, krypton, xenon, to create the kind of resonance of the frequency to actually enter the body and do what it was. Rife technology was amazing stuff. So this is what we're trying to do, is bring some credibility and some integrity to energy medicine. And so we just did a long discourse, a great interview with one of the primary inventor, along with a few other partners, of the TheraphI machine, and I'm quite sure it was explained quite well in the preceding segment. But there's another one that I'm aware of. It's called the TheraPlate. Now, the TheraPlate is really something that is big for horse trainers. There's a matter of fact, there's probably not a thoroughbred around that doesn't have the double-sized TheraPlate, which is kind of like, I guess, a 3.5 by 3 segment. You put two of them together and you hook them up and you stand your horse on it. Now, if you take a glass of water, and they also have smaller versions, if you take a glass of water and put it on the TheraPlate when it's activated, it creates a little tornado. It creates a vortex in the glass. If you again, as Dan was speaking, that's implosive, and the implosiveness is what creates coherence. And so something like the TheraPlate, although much simpler and really more for oxygenation of the blood and creating suppleness in tissue, and it also helps horses heal their hooves a lot of the times by creating greater circulation. So this, it's a limited thing, but it's legitimate. And it works on vortex principle. So we understand it. We're not saying it goes into the quantum. Quantum is real. But whether or not you create quantum coherence and it's about a coherent, something that you can perceive. It's like, supposedly everything is not there until you look at it, because your sight is what creates coherence in the quantum field. So anyway, we're just really trying to make the energy medicine real and speak about a few things. I didn't pick any particular Rife product because there's so many of them. And I'm not trying to just say, oh, junk, because I'm not saying junk. But I mean, if we're gonna be serious about ourselves and expect other people to take us seriously, we should also understand what it is. And the concept of frequency is nice until you understand that it has to be made really coherent in a bioactive way. And that'll end my spiel, and I'll give it over to Shelley.
The coherence is absolutely the critical factor, though, and that's why we spent so much of our discussion with Dan talking about how to consciously direct that field of energy, direct the tornado, as it were. It's similar to, say, magnetic, right? People wear magnets. And it's just a random, you don't know how much this or that or what the effect is. I mean, if we wanted to look at the modern idea of the placebo effect, it actually came out of 1955 when this physician, Henry Beecher, analyzed the results. It was only 15 studies that actually concluded that regardless of a patient's complaint, at least 1/3 of them showed a significant response to the placebo. So that's where it came from. But really, I think the beauty of all of these technologies is just to take us one step closer to the realization that everything we need is within us. We just need to learn how to communicate with it. In my experience of being on the TheraphI device was that I was able to communicate with that plasma. Well, that plasma is life. It's been around me. It's around everything on the planet, always has been. But until I was able to identify it, recognize it, develop a communication with it, it was just in the background, and I wasn't able to direct it. And so really, that's what all of these technologies have as value, is that they're at least bringing your awareness to the fact that there is something that can bring about balance and coherence.
Okay, So if there anybody out there who has a Rife machine, please know that probably a good 1/3 of the people that you treat will get better. Just because they, obviously I'm sharing this with people who own the machines or thinking of more about people who are going to buy them. We just, let's start really having a lot of integrity and allowing some real science into our mystic view of the world. So I think that's a good wrap up for that wonderful show we had with Dan Winter. Don't you think, Shelley?
It was such a great show, and I do have to say that his devices are really going to be so instrumental across the board globally.
Yes, when I can, I will be getting a TheraphI device. It would go really, there are a lot of things I can do with my hands as a massage therapist, a muscle whisperer. But there are certain people I'm dealing with that have degenerated discs, degenerated actual vertebra, and I really believe the TheraphI could make a huge difference in their lives. Something that I know my limits. I know what I can do, what I can't do. And to me, the TheraphI can take over where my limits end.
Right. So even if you don't actually buy one, you could just attend one of the places where they have TheraphI sessions and experience it. And then you can reactivate it yourself constantly.
And I guess I'll just put in something about magnets because of my understanding of magnets. The best magnets, I feel, are the ones that are identified which side is positive and which side is negative. And so the whole thing is just understanding that if you had a toothache, you would want to put the positive side there because that positive energy would create a dispelling of inflammation. If you had a sore or you would cut your gum and you wanted to heal, you would put the minus side on there because it would stimulate like a gathering of energy and it would increase the healing. If you did it on a toothache that where there's an infection, you would create more pain. So that's, very simple. To me, it's very intuitive once you understand whether or not you're trying to dispel something, in which case you would use the positive. And if you're trying to attract something, in which case you would use the negative. That's my 2 cents on biomagnets. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again next week on Global Mission of Peace, Mystic View.